Okay, so this comment comes from a conversation I was having with Mark Burdick, and it's actually in the second paragraph on the right-hand column of page 9 that begins on its own. Keep going, the right-hand column. Yeah, he said to me, it's, I guess, in the second sentence, however, applications for development submitted to the town's reviewing boards. And then he said, instead of using the word must be considered in the context of the policy goals and objectives in the comprehensive plan, he suggested the word should. And which just relaxes that command a little bit. And I was wondering about the nuance of that. It actually seemed like a good suggestion to me. Tom Angel might not approve of that because this, the language must kind of strictly puts it in a lane where the boards have to be using the context of this plan as opposed to they should be. And I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that, if we soften it a little or if we just leave it as an imperative.
I agree with Mark on that because we can't control what future boards do, and we can't dictate what future boards do or what future committees do. So I think should puts it under advisement.
Yeah.
That really, this is what we're anticipating. This is what people believe, what we believe as a board needs to be done. However, we also recognize we can't control what someone 10 years from now is going to do.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I don't have a strong feeling either way.
Okay.
I have no opinion. I was going to suggest instead of should, it could be will, but then hearing what Anne said, then I started to think, should the whole sentence be re-examined?
No.
Thanks, Anne. because what she's saying makes sense, and that's not accommodated for in this sentence. The notion that the context of this policy and goals in this plan are there for consideration. The way I don't know. She makes a good point, but I'm just wondering if that point needs to be it needs to be added here, either as a separate sentence or modifying this one. I don't know.
I feel like the sentence needs to stay, like the document. It's a little toothless without that sentence.
I agree. And I do think that, to Anne's point and to what Mark Burdick was talking about, should is a better word than must, because we can't actually dictate or control what happens, what boards will do in the future. But it is strongly suggested within this comprehensive plan that they should. And the truth is, once the zoning commission starts making new zoning laws, it will be a moot point.
Because they'll be the authority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they'll write the laws and we'll have public hearings and we'll either pass them or we won't, but.
Yeah. Okay.
Wendy, I have a corollary to that point you made.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are we finished with what you brought up?
I feel like we're finished with that word unless you have something to add.
No, should is fine.
Okay.
But I have a question on the process, and the general flavor of my questions tonight will be on process. The page makes it pretty clear and quite true that this plan will only be a dust collector unless it moves into zoning changes. And there are two parts of this question. Once this is approved, it gives me the impression, since we don't want it to become a book on a shelf that has no follow through, wouldn't this then, the creation of new ordinances on zoning, be of a high priority for the town?
Well, the way the process works, Frank, is that once we pass an iteration of the comprehensive plan, and hopefully it will be very, it will hold closely to this one with whatever adjustments we feel important to make, the very next thing the town board will do is set up the zoning commission and charge them with examining basically all of our zoning laws and writing new laws. And they use the comprehensive plan as basically the guidance to do that. So it won't sit. One of the reasons why I'm pushing this forward in this manner is so that we can establish the zoning commission and then let them do their work. So it
Thank you.
won't, yeah. Did
Thank
you
you.
have a part two to that?
I do. The zoning commission, then that's a new body that will be established, or does that already exist?
No, it's a brand new body.
Thanks. May I continue, since my questions are right along the same line?
Sure.
Before you continue, Wendy, can I just ask something? How do you want to capture the comments and changes that are made here? Are you
Well,
doing that?
I'm taking notes. I mean, so far
Okay.
we've changed a word.
Yes,
So,
right.
yeah.
In
we
16
did-
minutes.
Oh my God, okay. Well, yeah, I knew it was kind of weird to bring up a word.
Margaret,
But
we're
I-
just getting our momentum going. Relax.
So, I mean, in fact, Frank, before you continue, I would just like to know if there in this little introduction, if anybody else has any language concerns or concept concerns.
I have a comment on the discussion that just went on. I think we ought to remember that there are many recommendations in this plan that aren't really under the purview of zoning. And so the plan will be in force, and we'll have sort of it will set the direction for the town even beyond the zoning commission. So let's not
Right, no,
lose
Gary,
sight of that.
that's absolutely accurate. Like, I think especially now that we took the Climate Smart Pledge, there's a lot that the CAC and that group will be able to sink their teeth into with issues that have to do with land preservation or wind farms if we have them.
Boosting businesses, historic,
Correct.
all that sort of stuff. Yep.
You're absolutely right. There are, at the very end of this plan, there are action points for all varieties of topics. So that's a great point. Okay, besides that great point, does anyone have anything else on the introduction?
I do.
Okay,
Almost all of my questions are on the introduction, and they're really process oriented. So Gary, on the first page 9, in the first paragraph, all of which, the whole page of introduction here, I agree with wholeheartedly. In the first paragraph, middle, you indicate that there is an assignment of responsibilities.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering, where does that occur? And I just jump to, for reference purposes, the last chapter, chapter 7, which identifies all of the recommended actions. And
Do you want me to go there?
no,
Pardon me? Pardon me?
I said, do you want me to go to that right
No,
now?
you
Oh,
don't.
okay.
No, you don't need to. It's not a question of content or a position.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
in
it's a good point, Frank. And here's where it comes from. And I can see that that probably should be taken out, because in the previous version of the plan, that chapter 7 had a third column in it. It was only, there was like, when would this be done? And there was another column that said, who will do this? And we took that out because we weren't sure on some of the items who would be doing it. So,
Oh,
this,
Have you been reading my mind?
So you're thinking that that column should go back in, huh?
Yeah, well, my question really is, with that type of column in, who's going to do it, what's expected, and so forth. Maybe more than one column, two columns, three columns, whatever. Does that then become the responsibility of the board as it now has received the project, that we then begin to lay out who's going to do it, what's the time frame, what the objectives are, and so forth? Is that how this plays out, Gary?
Yes, yes. And, throughout the document, we talk about who should do various things, like setting up a committee for historical preservation, another committee for groundwater protection. All of those committees would report to the town board. So the town board would delegate the responsibility of researching the topic and coming up with a recommendation to one of these citizen committees. And then ultimately, it's the town board's decision on what to do. So even though that column is not in chapter 7 on the timing of the various recommendations, throughout most of the plan, it tells, it gives suggestions about who should be doing this, how it should get done.
Thank you.
So the question is, do you want to take that out of this paragraph?
Take what out? I'm
Uh,
No,
sorry.
Assigns
No, not at
responsibility
all.
for.
No, not at all. I think it's critical. I think it's right on target. My only question was, who gets to do that and where does it occur in the
Mhm.
plan? And I think you've said the board then takes the next step on that,
Yeah.
and it can be an additional addition to this chart.
And
Yes.
throughout the plan, Frank, there are a lot of suggestions, as Gary said, like when we're talking about monitoring the water source and the wellhead, or finding locating a wellhead. It's the plan basically says there should be a committee to do X, Y, or Z. So there's a lot of guidance already inherent in the plan.
Thank you. Got it. Would you like me to go on? I have a couple of other questions there. All of my questions this evening are really on the first dozen pages.
Okay. Sure.
On page 11, Gary,
Do you see it?
I can't see it because I'm on a phone, but I have a complete notebook copy. So I'm looking at page 11, the top half of the page,
Mhm.
and the revisions to the 2012 draft plan. I'm a bit OCD at times, and I try to match item per item. But this gray section at the top is a summary, not one that can be followed point by point to specific pages. It's a general summary of things we should be aware of. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, those were the main comments that we received from the public about the 2012 draft plan, and we were just noting here for people who are, who wanted to see revision of that draft plan, what we did, what we changed, and we could, make a cross correlation between these points and particular recommendations in the plan. I don't think it's necessary at this point, but.
No, I don't think those need to be. I think the generalization of the summary is fine, as long as I understand that's a summary. But on page 13, a similar comment, question really. And I think the layout is great. The level of specificity and clarity are great. But I was wondering, how did these goals and objectives arise? Did they arise after the work of all the recommendations? Or was it a combination of understanding the initial goals and then identifying what the objectives were that are further out in the book?
No, these came from the original plan, the one that was produced in 2012. And at the start of that, the first thing we did was talk about what are our goals, what can we agree on in the town that needs to be done. And those are those four big goals we have listed there.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And then the objectives were more or less worked out as we went through the recommendations. What specifically did we want to do to implement those goals? So the goals were more or less the first thing that we did, and the objectives got worked out through the process. Some of them in the original development of the 2012 plan, and some of them have been modified and added in this current version.
that's great. Have you done a crosswalk between these objectives and the specific recommendations? Or how do those specifics that are in the back of the book in chapter 7, how do they fit to these objectives?
Yes, we can see, we went back through, after we'd done the whole thing, we went back through to look at these goals and make sure that we had done something to implement each of the objectives. So we didn't put in the actual crosswalk there, but there's some recommendations at the end that correspond to each of these objectives.
Okay, and I guess my thinking was that as the board goes forward, there are many recommendations that it might be wise to associate those specific recommendations with each of the objectives to ensure that we are proceeding on the goals in a manner, an overall manner that is appropriate, so that we can attach a goal to each activity, or make sure each activity is nestled within a goal. But if you have that done already, we could ask Nina to fill it in, or if it's something that you would like us to do.
I'm
we can
confused,
try.
Frank, to what end? Just for like organizational purposes? Like, because it seems to me that the text of the document, the language of the document clearly connects to the objectives. Are you just saying for clarity that you would like it to have a chart where it lines up?
Well, a chart where it lines up would be helpful, but if you go to the organization of the specific recommendations, which are way back in chapter 7, they start on page 123. I've manually numbered them in the back of the book and tried to find them in each of the chapters so that I can make sure that I can find where they connect. But I'm not quite sure what goal they support.
I think that we can trust and that the goals are taken care of in the recommendations, because that happened during the very intense crafting process of the plan. Between Nina and her team and the members of the comprehensive review plan, that process all occurred.
Yeah, the question arises as we work on specific items, and there are many good ones, many excellent. There are many, and they are excellent. Is to make sure we know what goal does this activity support, and of what priority do we give it? So that would be my answer, Margaret, and that is that it really brings the goals and the activities together so that we know why we're doing them and can help us identify what priority, what sequence, what timing we're going to implement them.
So,
Well, I think that goes back to Anne's comment, like we are adopting this comprehensive plan as a blueprint, but we cannot tell a board 2 years from now what order they have to take these actions. And I feel like in chapter 7 in the back on 120, page 122, it does say above each section, future land use, economic development. So it does really break down what goal it is attached to. I don't think that the comprehensive plan can prioritize one of these over the other. It has to be, I think, a looser document than that. It has to be a blueprint. It cannot be a to-do list for a future board.
And Margaret, I think,
Margaret, that goes
excuse-
back, Mark. That goes back, Margaret, to my very first question, or second one, was on page 9, the plan needs to assign responsibilities. I agree with Gary on that. And when one assigns responsibilities, that's this board starting now.
I think we have to deal with this in a little bit more organic way, which is once we get this passed, I think that as a board, we will look at it and say, okay, how do we begin? And I think the first step is probably establishing a zoning commission, and then we can prioritize what we as a board for the next 2 years want to set in motion. And I think there's a lot of things that we can set in motion over the next 2 years, be it, protecting the water, or, there's a lot of moving parts that can happen at the same time as long as we can get citizens to participate. And from my point of view, as far as our workshopping this plan, it needs to be more about what's understanding if we have any problems with the suggestions in the plan. If there's something that is so odious to us or that we just disagree with, that we want to revise what the comprehensive review plan came up with. I know there are a few hot spots for us to talk about, but I don't think we can get bogged down in the weeds of what we will do after we finally pass this. I think we can deal with that after we pass it. And the purpose of these workshops is to understand what's in the plan that we feel comfortable passing or don't feel comfortable.
I would also just say it is the town board's responsibility. It is not this town board's responsibility. It might be another 40 years before this plan is touched again. I'm sorry, Gary, but so this plan is going to outlive us all, some of us, so it has to be a little looser. Like, we have to have good bones, but there has to be the flexibility for other people to, we are not going to accomplish all of these things in the next few years. It's maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like this document is much more long-term than that.
And Margaret, I think that we can decide what we want to focus in on, that's timely for this point in time, and get it going.
Agreed.
Gary, I have one question.
Sorry, when I've two points just before we move on is, one, we've already distracted ourselves from focusing on the document at hand. So
Yes.
we just need to determine if we are going to have a conversation about this is first chapter, is what is a plan and what we should be doing with it. Secondly, the topic that Frank brought up is identifying connections between chapter 1 and chapter 7. There's no modifications that he's, at least the way that I'm understanding, being made to chapter 1. So I would say that if there are modifications to a chapter that it's connected to, we talk about it when we get there. Otherwise, we're going to be flipping through this document left and right. Because it's built in order to connect, but we should go through it diligently. And when we get to chapter 7, page 122 with the summary, we can discuss that there.
Agreed. Gary, I have one question for you to, and maybe I'm the only person in the group that needs this explanation, but on page, I think you might need to make okay, there it is. Page, objective 1.2. Can you just clarify for us what cluster subdivision means?
Yeah, so we did put definitions of those in there, so we can go down and take a look and see what the actual definition is that we put in the plan. But in general, a clustered subdivision would take, let's say you have 100-acre lot in 5-acre zoning, so you could put 20 lots in there if you were subdividing it. For a cluster subdivision, you could put all of those 20 lots more closely, it's less than 5 acres and more closely spaced, and have the rest of the property be conservation land that would be accessible to everybody in the subdivision.
So
Right.
it's a way of preserving more open space by allowing the lot size to be smaller.
Exactly, and by making allowing the lot size to be smaller, it also can give you more affordable housing. So it can do both of those things.
Terrific, thank you.
The conservation subdivision is slightly different, and I'm trying to recall it's basically the same. It has the same goal, but it's a slightly different technique. Once we get to that chapter, we can focus on the definition of it. We put the definition in there.
Yeah, I put the definitions in the chat.
Okay, can we move on to where are we moving on to? The chapter 1. It's so funny. Goals and objectives. Is that what's next?
I'm sorry, Nathan, the definition you put in the chat is the definition that's in the plan.
Yes, so on page
I'm
60,
sorry.
yeah, on page 67, clustered subdivisions and conservation subdivisions are defined.
Okay,
So
thank you.
those
I
are
just
both
want-
in the chat. So for people,
I
that-
just wanted to confirm. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
they're from, yeah, I didn't just pick those from Google.
Maybe just
I knew it. I just want to make sure.
Yeah,
Right, am I correct in assuming that we are now moving into chapter 1
we're still in chapter.
Chapter 2.
or chapter
Well,
2?
well,
Yeah.
one is Frank have any more thoughts on chapter 1, and then do Margaret, Ann, and myself have any?
Gotcha.
I do not have any for chapter 1.
Okay. Margaret,
Nothing additional.
I'm fine.
Margaret, you're fine. The only one this is a question, Gary.
Mhm.
On page 10, it refers to the screenshots, or the shot in there is the Stanford Master Plan from 2012, but in the appendix it looks like it's 2011 material. Are those two different documents, or is it the same document just named differently?
The appendix has 2011 material. I think it's the same document. It's probably when we completed it versus when it was actually submitted to the town board. I can check that on the appendix. I didn't realize it was 2011 material.
Yeah,
Where does it say 2011? Can you give me a
So
page?
if you jump to, well, it's a big part, but it starts on 145. It's the town of Stanford master plan update with the polling.
Okay.
And then there's another one is the public discussion and conversation.
Oh, okay, that's different. So these were the first steps of the master plan committee that was first, or not the first steps, but intermediate steps that the master plan committee was taking. So this actually, this event happened on 2011.
Right.
We took the results of this event in consideration when we created the plan. The plan itself was finished in 2012.
Okay, so but the plan is not included in, like, as a historical document. It's not included later in this plan.
That's right. That was a draft plan, and
Okay.
we revised the draft to produce this one.
Got it.
Oh, this
okay.
is still a draft plan. This is our second draft plan.
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah.
okay. Do we? Yeah, it's a separate conversation, so I'm not gonna. It's not about this document.
We can make that draft plan. It's certainly available. We can make it available if you want to read it. Want to take a
Well,
look at it.
that's what I was gonna say, is that it might be good for us to just have it as a record, but I suspect it's probably already existing somewhere. I'm just trying to collect everything digitally, but.
Mhm, mhm.
It will also,
I certainly have a electronic copy. Wendy, it's probably on the website somewhere. You just need to create a link to it because it was on there before.
I also have a copy in my office. I, for one, if, I'm having enough trouble staying focused on where we are today as opposed to where we were then, but I definitely, Nathan, if you want to see a copy of it, I have it.
It's less about me, and it's just if anyone else is curious in the community, I just want to make sure that we've got it available somehow, whether it's part of this or there's a note. We have at least that we have knowledge on how to make it available. That was my only comment on chapter 1.
Yeah, this material at the start of the appendix, Nathan, is basically the PowerPoint from that presentation of the public discussion that we had in 2011.
That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure if I was missing something. So thanks.
Okay, so where are we now?
Chapter 2.
What page is that?
It starts on page 15.
Okay. Good Lord. Unbelievable. I think missing chapter 2. Okay, so Sally Forth, I don't seem to have it.
Do you just want to put it on the screen, Nate? Oh, this is it. I'm sorry,
yeah.
mine's black and white. Yeah.
Yeah, Gary has it on screen.
Is this the existing conditions?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I start on page 19. I go from 14 to 19, so.
Well, the text starts on 18, but there it is. Yeah.
Okay, oh yeah, well, I got the tomato picture, so looks like I might just be missing one page.
Well, in the print and the PDF numbering don't match up either, because there are intentional pages left blank for printing purposes, but they still show up as a page number in the PDF.
Okay, so who wants to begin a discussion of any questions or problems they may have? Margaret.
No, okay, I'm really fast because I've already gone through this. So I don't have any comments on this page. So I've already asked on this chapter. I've already asked Gary. I already talked about this. So I'm good on this chapter. Yeah, I'm good on this chapter.
Me too. Okay. I believe I am too.
I have one question. It's not until page 29, so I don't know if anyone has anything sooner.
Well, just ask you a question.
Okay, so if you go to page 29, where you talk about these schools, if you go back up, I think it's 29, maybe 28. Yeah, okay, so the first paragraph section, it says, within the past decade, Stanford's only elementary school, Cold Spring Early Learning Center, began serving only pre-K through first grade. Older students now attend school in Pine Plains, Millbrook, or Rhinebeck. That's not accurate. Cold Spring Early Learning Center is actually part of Pine Plains Central School District. It was never a school for the town of Stanford, per se. So there are students in our town who will always go to Millbrook, always go to Rhinebeck, and I believe Weebatuck as well. So the language there, I feel, is, if we can sort of shift that, it did change from a K through 5 building to a pre-K through 1, but it didn't affect all the children of the town, only those in Pine Plains Central School District.
Well, I can just say it's fine to change the language to clarify. I can just say that what we intended was that this was the only elementary school in Stanford.
Right.
Right.
Right. But I feel like it's misleading that it sounds like all the students then are now shifted to other school districts where And maybe it's just me because I'm sensitive to it because I'm on the school board.
No, I can-
It's
I can-
entirely possible.
So I can see how it's confusing, Anne. So we should reword that.
Yeah,
Anne,
and,
could
and,
you-
and also add in Weebatuck.
Anne, could you suggest, could you suggest the language for that since you're the most informed?
Sure, let me write that down so I remember. I'm assuming you don't need me to wing this and do it right now, Wendy.
No, ma'am, I sure don't.
Yeah, because we don't want that. That's
No,
totally
we're not
fine.
going to do that now.
Yeah. And then for my next routine,
Yeah. So let's see. Nathan, do you have any questions about this chapter?
I don't think so. I'm doing a quick refresher to verify that. I remember when I was reading this, how my reaction was how in depth it was as far as existing conditions, because it wasn't just looking at the existing conditions of the town in its physicality, but
Mhm.
also the demographics, the financial disparity, and that types of thing. So I thought it was extremely, no pun intended, comprehensive. And it captured a lot of data that, as a historical document has a lot of value, I think. So, and my takeaway was that a lot of this is not, there's not a lot around the lack of clarity or lack of information, because it's really just, it's an accurate capture of the town at a given moment in time.
Right. Frank?
Yes, just 2 points, 2 questions. On page 27,
Okay.
Yep.
my page and your page are different.
Okay.
I think your page is, I'm looking at the page with the American flags for the 9/11.
Yes, that's the same page.
Hey, that's page
Demographics.
27. Yeah.
Well,
That's-
it
Yep.
might not matter what the images are. Gary, in the body, maybe it's the 4th paragraph, it begins to explain the reduction in population from, let me see, from 2018, 3,758 residents to 3,823 residents. And I'm sure the numbers are accurate, no worries there. But that's only 65 people. Is that significant enough for an element for the town board's planning? I mean, and envisioning the future? It seems so small and so insignificant. And you do mention later in the plan that we don't know yet what the COVID impact has been with people moving up. So I was just looking to get your sense of agreement or disagreement that it's almost an insignificant statistical number.
Yes, it is. And I think at some point we say in there that the number itself is not important.
Yeah, on 28.
Yeah, there we go. For Stanford, the absolute estimated number representing decline is not in itself significant, although this decline would typically indicate significant shifts in the community, such as a shortage of jobs or a lack of housing option and other amenities that attract young adults and families with children, which could lead to residents to migrate to other communities. So I think we're agreeing here that the absolute number isn't much and it's not all that significant, but I guess it's maybe perhaps a warning that something else is going on that we need to keep an eye on.
Perfect, I got it. In fact, as soon as you mentioned it, Margaret, I found it. So my apology. One last question, and I'm flipping pages very rapidly. I can tell you what, here it is. on page 62, in the first side of the left side of the page, first paragraph, it mentions a groundwater resources study from the year 2000.
Mhm.
Yep.
We're 20 years out, and we've had tens of thousands of dollars expended by businesses, in particular the town, on water purification. Should one of the recommendations in the master plan to conduct a new updated groundwater resource study?
We don't recommend that specifically, although we certainly could. What's recommended, if you recall, is to establish a groundwater resources committee and to implement the recommendations of the previous groundwater resources study, which were never really implemented. And they are steps that would be taken to protect the groundwater. We also recommend that we do repeated sampling of the groundwater so we can monitor what's going on. So if there looks like there's some deterioration, then some study would have to be done in order to determine what we should do about that.
And
But
that's
we-
something we can act on. I remember it was just so goofy that was something that, during the election, Mark D'Agostino was saying that we were going to be regulating everybody's wells when what the test was 50 random wells that the samples were taken from. And I think that is a program, and it was voluntary. Everybody whose well was tested agreed to have their well tested. But that's something we can get on right away.
The way a new study would help us is, the study that we did previously involves some modeling of the current build out in water use in town, and whether projecting that would likely cause a deterioration of groundwater in the future. So there was a modeling part of that. So if we wanted to do another study, we could redo that modeling. The town hasn't changed that much, so I think the most important thing would be to implement the recommendations that were suggested at that time, and then keep track of the groundwater to see if we do have any problems.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Right on. Thank you.
Is that everybody? Well, that's funny. I have exactly the same question. Does anyone actually implement the plan? Does anyone else have anything for this chapter?
I do not.
Okay. Well, we're at 7:53. So because people, I think I studied chapter 3 for future land use because I thought we were doing this tonight. But if nobody else is prepared to discuss it, then we could end this session now, and know that we will, when our next session is, we'll do chapter 3 and chapter 4, both of which I think are pretty short chapters.
Length does not determine the complexity, though.
Exactly.
Yes, oh grasshopper.
Can we say then that we should be ready for 3, 4, and 5, just in case we move through things more quickly?
I think that's a great idea, Margaret. Look, let's be prepared to discuss 3, 4, and 5. And if we don't make it that far, then we don't make it that far.
Right.
Okay.
So if I'm remembering correctly, the next time we're going to be discussing, workshopping this